We're so glad that you joined us for our online service. I'm Pastor Alex, the executive pastor here at Gold Creek. In a minute, we're going to get started with our worship song as well as a message for you. Before we do, though, if you're new here, maybe you've been watching for a little while, but you just haven't connected with us here yet, we would love to connect with you. There's a number on the screen. You text Gold Creek. It allows our team to follow back up with you. Maybe you're looking to get into a connect group, Bible study. Maybe you're looking to volunteer. Whatever it might be, we want to help you get connected at Gold Creek. That's how you make this church your own. And for all of you who have been contributing with your time and your resources, thank you so much. This is a time where we're still learning how to do church. So there's a number on the screen, and you text GC Mill Creek to that number. It's going to give you a link back that allows you to give a financial contribution to that. And again, thank you for being so faithful. Every day we're learning how to do ministry in a whole new way. And it is some days challenging, but it's so encouraging to see you, Gold Creek, step up and financially help us make it happen. So thank you. So we're going to start with our worship and then a message. Join me.
By now they'd fall, but you have never failed me yet. Waiting for change to come, knowing the battle's on, for you have never fail me yet. Your promise still stands. Great is your faithfulness, your faithfulness. 'Cause I'm still in your hands. This is my confidence. You never fail me. is your faithfulness, your faithfulness. 'Cause I'm still in your hands, and this is my confidence. You never fail me. Your promise still stands. Great is your faithfulness, your faithfulness. 'Cause I'm still in your hands, and this is my confidence. You never fail me. You never fail us, God. You never fail us.
Hey, welcome. I'm glad you joined us today. This is a special sermon, one that's been on my heart that I get to share today. And as an on-demand person, you get the privilege of watching a service that we film on site. And it's kind of cool. We go to different places and oftentimes we're able to do things we can't do in the building. And we've had this privilege of being able to do this, and we've learned how to do this better through all this summer. And so in just a minute, I'll explain why I'm by an airport, why I'm near Boeing, why we're here at Payne Field. But before I do, let me talk to you. You're watching today as an on-demand viewer. You're watching our YouTube channel or some way you're watching the on-demand. And I want to thank you for making this your church, for the way that you're staying connected and learning and staying a part of the church. And it's my prayer, and I hope you'll hear my heart, that even as I share this message is for you, for me to connect with you and for you to connect with us. We want to learn better how to serve you. We want to learn better how to help you serve. And as you do that, whether you're here in the state or whether you're in another country or whether you're in another state, it doesn't matter. We believe that you're connected in a way that's meaningful, that you're a part of us. And I just want to say thank you for being a part of us and making this your church. And we're glad you're a part of us. So let's dig in today. Which, by the way, can I share this? If you happen to be in state and you're going to come and visit us, one of the cool things about what's happening right now is that we have a great online service. We do a live online from our services, but we also have a drive-in. We've kept our drive-in, and now you can drive into the church, and we can serve you coffee out there. You can be safe in your car. It's a great place. And then we're also doing an inside church. And we're like a spiritual restaurant where you go in and you wear your mask in, and once you get seated and there's distance between everybody, you're able to take your mask off. And so if you're nearby and you haven't wondered what we're doing, or you wondered what we've done, that's exactly what we're doing. We'd love to have you join us. So let's dig in today. I want to talk to you about let's roll. That wording, that saying was a popular saying way before 9/11, but on 9/11 it took a special significance. And 11 days from now, or 11 days from when this sermon's going to air, is 9/11. And as I was preparing for this message, I thought back about what happened on 9/11 in Flight 93. At 8 a.m., Flight 93 left the airport, Newark Airport. It was headed to LA. It was full of people. It was delayed for 42 minutes because of the traffic on the runway. But this Boeing airplane started on its way to Newark. 3 minutes after it got in the air, a plane hit one of the towers. 17 minutes later, another plane hit the towers. And this plane was on its way to LA, not knowing about anything else that was going on. At cruising altitude at 9:25, the pilot radioed and said, "There's a problem." 3 minutes later, Zaid Samir Jara, a Lebanese terrorist, busted in and took over the plane. All the passengers were taken to the back of the plane, and one of the terrorists had a bomb on his body. It was there that a gentleman by the name of Todd Beamer began to think about what to do. He made a phone call and he ended up with a GTE supervisor whose name was Lisa Jackson. He described to her exactly what was happening, that there was 2 hijackers that had taken over the plane with knives and a bomb. And after a 17-minute conversation, he realized that the plane had turned around and headed back, and they were on the way to Washington. He knew what was about to happen, that in some ways these terrorists were going to either attack the White House or the Capitol. In order to save lives, Beamer and his friends devised a plan to take over the plane again. In the phone call, he told his family and his friends, "If you don't hear from me again, I want them to know that I love them." He gathered together all of the passengers, and what's interesting in the story is that he invited them to pray the Lord's Prayer with him, or not the Lord's Prayer, but Psalms 23 with him. He began to recite it. "The Lord is my shepherd. I have all that I need." And as he went through Psalm 23 and he got to the end, and then he said those famous words, "Let's roll." And he and a number of other passengers charged forward and took over the plane again. He was unwilling to allow evil to pilot his plane. Now, why do I tell you that story? Well, it's close to 9/11. It's good to remember. And I love that story because Todd Beamer is a wonderful Christian. He was a guy that went to Wheaton College, and his wife has shared in many churches. She tells a story, and his kids are now followers of Jesus Christ. And his story is really powerful, and it continues to have impact. His courage is amazing. But it reminds us that we need to have the same kind of courage. That when things happen that are out of our control and we're hijacked, there's something that we can do, which is what I want to say today. In this last few months, I've been thinking, it feels like we've been hijacked. On March 2020, our plane got hijacked, which is kind of interesting. As a pastor, so many cool things were happening. The Woodinville campus was being built, and we were having great success there. And our Lake Stevens property, we were buying the property. We were moving ahead, and the church was growing, and there was amazing things happen. And it just seemed like the finances were good, the people were good, people's businesses were good. There was so much good news in the air. It was such an amazing time. And then on March of 2020, all of a sudden, 3/2020, we got hijacked by some terrorists. Let me describe the terrorists to you. The first terrorist is COVID. He's not a Lebanese terrorist. Apparently, maybe he's a Chinese terrorist. I don't know. But COVID hijacked us. And all of a sudden now, we're wearing masks. I really enjoy Jason. Jason and I talk all the time, but I love one of Jason's posts. He said, if you have pretty eyes and an ugly face, this is your time. In other words, it's a good time to wear a mask. We never dreamed that we'd be wearing masks everywhere we go and be required. Our schools. COVID has hijacked our schools. All the things that we used to do and our systems and all of our plans, everything that were happening, he's made it harder. For teachers, they're having to learn to teach a whole new way. For students trying to learn from home, it just seems impossible. And then for parents who are trying to work from home as well as teach from home, it's hijacked our life. And then on top of that, our work life has changed. It's so easy to think about that, isn't it? So many of you, I think close to 80% of those that go to our church are working from home. They're doing more home projects because they realized their home needed work because they're at home all the time now. And then church got hijacked too. I mean, we closed down church, went all online, and then, you know, I'm wearing this t-shirt because it celebrates the fact that we went to the farm and we did this drive-in church, and we've had a great time, but all the stuff that we had planned just kind of got hijacked. And now for the church, you know, you are either worshiping at home, which many of you are doing right now, or you're worshiping in your car and watching it on the screen, or you're wearing a mask and coming into the building, and it all just feels different. And then on top of that, grandparents who are more susceptible to COVID haven't been able to see or touch or hug their grandchildren. It's been an unusual time. And then our businesses are hurting. Some have closed or about to close. Some are facing financial difficulty. And on top of that, our travel completely changed. Those of us that used to fly and go places and do all kinds of things, it's like nobody's flying anymore. And because of that, Boeing has had to institute 10% layoffs. And on top of that, they're considering right now moving the 787 out of Everett. Here we are at the Boeing plant. And things are going to change. And it just seems like COVID has hijacked our world. And then there's our health. It's hijacked our health. For some people, they already have had COVID. And there's others that are going to get COVID. There's some that are just afraid of it. Some have had COVID and don't even know they've had it. Others are never going to get COVID. It doesn't really matter. All of this has hijacked our health, and we can't help but think about it at all the time. And our culture has never been more judgmental or divided over each other. There's some that are incredibly sensitive over COVID and incredibly judgmental of those that are not, and those that are not are judgmental of those that are, and there's this huge divide. And on top of that, the flu season's coming. It's not going to change. It seems like COVID has hijacked our plane. And then there's a second terrorist that came in. Unbelievably, I thought the first terrorist is bad enough, COVID, but the second terrorist is what I would call social unjust or social unrest. It started with the horrible death of George Floyd. And through all of that, there's really some good things that have come from it. I've had great conversations with Jason, and we've had great conversations around the issue of racism, and there's been an expression of looking again to make sure that racism is not in my life, in the lives of those around it, to call it out. And many people have an expression, and we've called the expression of Black Lives Matter, that we're in partnership with our Black brothers and sisters, our family members who are hurting, and we have that expression. But then there's this other political side of this, where there's a movement, a Black Lives Matter movement that's a political movement that has at its heart socialism and a whole bunch of political ideas that are, many of them are anti-God and anti-Christian. And there's this whole other side of that makes it really hard. And then on top of that, add to that those that have taken the advantage of the unrest to create riots and lawlessness. And it's just hard to imagine that we watch our downtown, beautiful cities, Portland and Seattle, completely devastated by lawlessness. And there seems to be crime that's not being persecuted. We watched in horror as a man is pulled from his vehicle and beaten. A woman that's covered in paint and told this is not her country anymore. Stores being burnt, looted, downtowns ruined, and our police are hated and loved. It's interesting, when I talk to the officers that I know closely, they'll say how much they are loved, how many people are coming to them and telling them how much they appreciate them and love them and they're supporting them. But at the same time, they face some of the most difficult times they've ever had in their lives. They're hated more than they ever are. And the divide just seems so crazy. And it's hijacked our society. And on top of that, in the social unrest. Alcoholism is on the increase, drug addiction is on the increase, homelessness is on the increase, and this social unrest is not going away. There's a third terrorist. It's political unrest. Of course, to add to everything, it has to be voting season. And this year, it seems more than ever before that the divide is greater than it's ever been in my lifetime. I really feel sorry for couples. I know a number of couples that Republicans married Democrats or Democrats married Republicans, and they can't even have a conversation at the table anymore. They're going to cancel each other out in their vote, and I just feel sorry for them because it's so difficult to have a political conversation in our society today, and then even in our church where we have Republicans and Democrats that come together, and it's hard to have a conversation. It's hard not to be judgmental of each other and to think bad things. And even COVID in the midst of all this has become political. How can a health issue become so political? There's a fourth terrorist, and that's spiritual unrest. I've never seen a time when people and culture has moved away from God at a faster rate. It's obvious nowadays whether or not you're a genuine follower of Jesus Christ. Because genuine followers are in there, they're sticking to it, and you're watching today, you're probably a genuine follower, or you're thinking about being a follower of Jesus Christ. But genuine followers are becoming very obvious. Those who were on the edge have moved away from God. And it seems like people are opposing the church more than they ever have. And in fact, what we know is that it's just a matter of time that we're going to find ourselves in the crosshairs of some of this social unrest. And the church is going to be at the center of difficulties. What do we do? The title of the message tells it all. Let's roll. Our plane's been hijacked. We're headed for disaster. Evil is taken over, but we don't have to let it be that way. Let's roll means that we can do what Todd Beamer did. We get together and we trust God, and He helps us do things differently. You know, I began to think about it. What message do I have? How do we think about that differently? I look back at a guy that was not afraid of difficult circumstances and difficult cultures. His name was Paul. He was a missionary that God chose to reach out to cultures that were far from God. And I love his letter. His letter is to us as genuine Christians. And if you're not a genuine Christian today, his letter is to you as well. It helps you understand what being a genuine Christian is all about. Here's what he says in 2 Corinthians 6, verse 1. It says this: "As God's partners, we beg you not to accept this marvelous gift of God's kindness and then ignore it." Now, this is interesting. He's writing letters to a church that was in a difficult culture, not too unlike our culture, a culture that had riots and unrest and all these problems. But what he's saying to them is, don't ignore this incredible gift that you've given. And that's the very first thing that God says to us. Don't ignore that. And then he says this: "For God says, at just the right time I heard you. On the day of salvation I helped you. Indeed, the right time is now. Today is the day of salvation." I just thought, here's what Paul's saying. He's saying, let's roll. The time is now. We've got to do something right now. Let's roll. We can't let someone hijack our plane. You know, a few years ago as a young pastor, I started full-time ministry at age 25, and I think I was 27 when I started to be the first senior pastor role that I took. And I remember I was complaining to somebody, telling them how hard it was to be a senior pastor. And I remember this older pastor reached over and he rubbed my head and he rubbed the back of my head and he said, "Hey, I don't feel any lumps on the back of your head." And then he rubbed my back and he says, "Do you have any welts on the back of your back?" And he said, "Do you have any broken bones?" He said, "You know, Paul was beaten, stoned, whipped, broken bones." He said, "Until that happens, I don't want to hear you complain anymore." It was a good reminder to me that I don't have it as hard as Paul did. And it's a good reminder to us that what Paul is saying is he's challenging us. It doesn't matter what your culture is doing right now. It doesn't matter what's hijacked you right now. You have a responsibility. The time is now to do something. And then he begins to detail out what we are to do. In verse 3, it says this: we live in such a way that no one will stumble because of us. No one will find fault with our ministry. You know what he's saying? Let's roll. Life is about ministry. You're ministers. If you haven't heard this yet today, I want you to hear this loud and clear. What you and I have a responsibility to do right now is to be ministers, to go into our world, into our homes, into our workplaces and all, to be ministers. The church is a gathering place of ministers. And what I like what Paul says is that we live differently. We live in a way that people are going to understand our ministry and respect our ministry. It's kind of interesting. A minister does a simple thing. All he does is takes Jesus wherever he's going. On a recent trip that I took, I had such a great time. And I was off for days. We were doing a 10-day trip, and we have a big pack. I've talked to you about it before, but we're going to go for 10 days and be in this wilderness. And along the way, I met a packer who was there to help us pack. And the very first thing he asked me was what I thought about his circumstances. Little by little, I found out what had happened to him. He had been kicked out of his church for some rule that he broke. And he wanted to know what I thought about what went on. And he was very angry and he's very bitter. And as I sat there that day thinking about this young man, all I could do is bring Jesus to him. And I talked to him about the huge difference between religion, which is all about rules and rigid and all that, and a relationship with Jesus. And I said, hey, Jesus came and he said, I didn't come to condemn the world, but that the world through me might be saved. And I said, he doesn't want to condemn you. He just wants to have a relationship with you. We had such a great conversation. But there I was in the middle of Alaska, or in the north part of Alaska. All of a sudden, I'm a minister again. Not because I'm a pastor, but because Jesus is with me next to a guy that I've never met before. So are you. If you don't understand this, life is ministry. You're a minister to your kids, you're a minister to your family, you're a minister to your coworkers, you're ministers. Life is ministry. Now he goes on in verse 5. This is what Paul says. We've been beaten and put in prison, faced angry mobs, worked to exhaustion, endured sleepless nights, and gone without food. Now, of course, none of us have it that bad yet. It seems like everywhere Paul went, riots happened. He goes on and he says this: we prove ourselves by purity, our understanding, our patience, our kindness, by the Holy Spirit within us, by our sincere love. And then this is the key verse. We faithfully preach the truth. God's power is working in us. We use the weapons of righteousness in the right hand for attack and in the left hand for defense. God's power is within us. You know what he's saying? Let's roll. Truth always wins. I love this picture. Paul's out there in the midst of riots and being beat and all that, and he says, I faithfully preach the truth. It's never been more important than today in this culture where our plane has been hijacked by so many things. None of those things matter. You know what matters? The truth matters. And there's one way for you to figure out the truth. Whenever I talk to people about spiritual things and about religion and about all that, you know, they'll always tell me this. They'll say, well, this is what I think. And then they'll tell me all the things that they think. And I just laugh to myself because I think all they're doing is making up their own religion. They get to make their own rules. They get to create their own religion. They get to make God into their image. And I have something different. I don't think the truth. I know the truth. And his name is Jesus Christ. God came down on earth so that we would know how to live differently. He set a standard for truth. The way He lived and every word that He spoke is capital T truth. And you and I don't have to wonder what the truth is. He defines truth. He's the picture of truth. His words work. And I love today, more than ever before, we need to be faithful to the truth, not our ideas, not anything but Jesus and His words that define the truth. 2 Corinthians goes on to say this, we serve God whether people honor us or despise us, whether they slander us or praise us. We are honest, but they call us imposters. I like this. Paul's just like in their face. He's saying, it doesn't matter what people think of us. It doesn't matter all this other stuff going on. We fear God, we don't fear people. He goes on to say this, we're ignored even though we're well known. We live close to death, but we're still alive. We have been beaten, but we're not killed. Here's what I think he's saying. He's saying, let's roll. We serve God. Serving is our purpose. You know what it means to let's roll? It means to recognize you're a minister, and secondly, it means that you need to learn how to serve, that we need to learn how to serve, that we serve God. We don't serve our culture, we don't serve our pastor, we don't serve our church, we serve God. Serving takes humility. It's really important for us to understand that. When you step into the room, if you step into the room to be served, you don't have to be humble. But when you step into your world, when you step into our world, we realize that we're serving. You wonder what's going to happen in this next year and how the plane's not going to be hijacked? We're going to find a new way to serve. We're going to serve our community in ways we never dreamed. When this whole thing happened, what had happened? Our Hope Creek stepped up. We served twice as many people as we did before. We put on twice as many staff. When we're facing these crises, our church is going to step in and we're going to serve. And serving takes humility. It means that we recognize it's not about us. It takes sacrifice, but serving gives you a purpose. It's one of our core values. It's one of our core values. We talk about celebrate, we talk about connecting with God and each other, and we talk about contributing. Contributing is serving, giving. It's when we learn to be unselfish. And serving is what makes us alive. You ever wonder what your purpose in life is? It's to serve. I'm challenging you. You need to have a place of service, and you need to look at life as serving. Paul goes on to say this in verse 10. Our hearts ache, but we always have joy. We are poor, but we give spiritual riches to others. We own nothing, but we have everything. I can't tell you how much that speaks to my heart. I hope you look at that verse really closely. You may think that you don't have much to give. You may think that you don't have anything. But what I love what Paul says is we have what we need. We have everything that we need. And for us to do what God's calling us to do, it's going to cost us everything. I wish I could get you together right now and just kind of huddle us all up and read Psalm 23 again. I wish I could be as brave as Todd Beamer and just talk about storming the front and taking on these terrorists. But I'm here right now just challenging you. It's time to roll. I don't know how this is going to turn out. I don't know about COVID and how that's going to end. I don't know about social unrest. I don't know about the end of the politics. But one thing I know, we have everything we need to do what we need to do. So I want to challenge you. My challenge to you is in this crisis, let's roll. We're going to step up. You have what you need. I want you to think about what you have. The most valuable thing you have in your life is your story. Is your story of grace and how God took care of you. And I'm challenging you more than ever before, when our world is falling to pieces, I want you to share your story about what God has done in your life. I want you to talk every chance you can, I want you to look for chances to minister and share your story. I want you to share your faith. You know what that means? When somebody's in a crisis around you, when they're in a tough spot, I want you to pray for them. I want you to tell them you're praying for them. I want you to ask God to do something for them. I want them to know that God cares for them because of your faith. And I want you to realize you have what you need. You have your church. Collectively, we can do more than we've ever done before. As a church, you know what we're going to do? We're going to grow through this time. We're going to go genuine followers of Jesus Christ who are ready to step up and minister. I invite you to join us in this effort. This next month, we're going to do a series, we're calling it Flip It, because we're going to take a look at whatever the negative thing in your life is happening right now, and we're going to flip it around and show you how to do that. It's the book of Philippians, and I think if there's ever a time in our culture that needs to hear this message, it's right now. And this is a perfect time for you to use the tool of your church to invite people to either listen online or in person or at the drive-in. This is your chance to invite. And then I challenge you one more time. You're a minister. I don't know how to say this more clearly. Your job is to take Jesus wherever you go. And when He's there with you and He comes in, He represents the truth that person needs, that situation needs, that life needs. And I don't know how that's going to turn out for you, but I know this, that God has a way of showing you what's next. I can only imagine Todd Beamer running down that aisle that day, not knowing what would happen. I think it just means when we say let's roll, let's get moving and trust that God's going to direct our life. Here's how I want to close today. I want you just to pray with me. Just bow your heads. Lord, in these next couple of moments, I invite you to speak to us. Today, this is a challenge. I'm challenging people to do something outside of themselves. And I just have to trust your Holy Spirit, Lord, and the truth of your word to penetrate our hearts, to help us hear what you're challenging us to do. And so I am asking you, Lord, to work in the lives of those that are listening right now. And I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. As we close this service today, in the live service, I'm going to have the big God can out. And we're going to have cards that people can write on the God can, and on the back is a blank side, because I'm challenging them to ask God to show them what it means to let's row. I don't need to define that for you. I'm asking them to be a minister. I'm asking them to find a place to serve. I'm asking them to use all that God has given them, exactly what they need. And as they write that down, I think God's going to challenge them to do things that they never dreamed. And out of this message today, my prayer is that there will be an inspiration, that somebody will be a Todd Beam that challenges the terrorists that have taken over our plane, and that we begin to move forward in the way that God's challenging us to move forward. So I don't know what that means for you. As you're watching today, I want you to consider texting the word God can to the number that's on the screen. And we're going to text back, and I want you to write down the thing that you want to give to God, whatever it is. It may be a ministry that God's calling you to, that He's talking to you about right now. It may be a family member that's on your heart. It's something that you can't do on your own, and you're trusting that God can do it. I invite you right now to text on the screen, God can, to that number. And as you do so, I'm trusting that you will have a story, a God can story, of how God uses you. We'll see you next week.
Thank you so much for joining us for the message today. If you want to keep up to date with what we've got going on at Gold Creek, be sure to check out our social media platforms, as well as our website, goldcreek.org. That's where you can get to know what's going on, when the next service might be, what we're doing. So until next time, God bless.